of, I guess we could start with 1956 for our generation. This was the beginning of the rise of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King decided that in Montgomery, Alabama, black people had to pay the same prices on the buses as did white people, but we had to sit in the back. And we could only sit in the back if every available seat was taken by a white person. If a white person was standing, a black person could not sit. So Dr. King and his associates got together and said, "This is inhuman. We will boycott your bus system." Now understand what a boycott is. A boycott is a passive act. It is the most passive political act that anyone can commit, a boycott. Because what the boycott was doing was simply saying, we will not ride your buses. No sort of antagonism. He was not even verbally violent. He was peaceful. Dr. King's policy was that nonviolence would achieve the gains for black people in the United States. His major assumption was that if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none.
To be clear, the Democrats brought many of their problems on themselves. FDR's New Deal gave a boost to the white working class at the expense of the black working class during the Great Depression. The Wagner Act he signed into law guaranteed workers the right to unionize, but only in industrial unions where most of the workforce was white. Black workers who occupied domestic and agricultural jobs still had no union protection. FDR wasn't racist per se. The problem was, as a Democrat, he needed to keep the loyalty of Southern white voters. He did this by permitting a certain amount of racial discrimination. As unions gained power after World War II, their members and leadership were overwhelmingly white. They could use unions as vehicles to struggle for better lives. Black people didn't have this luxury. They needed to establish a separate civil rights movement. The March on Washington in 1963, famous for Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was an attempt to fuse the struggles for racial equality with workers' rights. George Meany, the head of the AFL, refused to endorse the March on Washington. The head of the UAW, Walter Reuther, wanted to endorse it. This was just one of the many disagreements they had that eventually led Reuther to pull the UAW out of the AFL in 1968. Meany was in a comfortable spot during the 1960s. He was the head of the most powerful union in the country, a mover and shaker in Washington, D.C., and his workers pulled down solid middle-class wages. They had become what they set out to be since Samuel Gompers founded them in the late 1800s. The aristocracy of labor. He did not want to overturn that apple cart. This was the main reason why he supported the Vietnam War and the fight against communism. While Reuther had the reputation as a fighter and activist, Meany had the reputation of a responsible statesman. While the fight for civil rights was gaining steam during the 1960s, changes in the global economy were taking the wind out of union sails. Competition from foreign factories were cutting into American jobs, and the weakening American dollar was feeding inflation. In the early 1970s, President Nixon unpegged the American dollar from gold, undoing a major pillar of the system established at Bretton Woods.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what does this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today.
The American dollar would become less stable, and economic ups and downs would become more unpredictable. Women entered the workforce in greater numbers, not merely due to feminism, but also because more families started to need two incomes to stay above water. States passed laws banning sexual harassment in the workplace. No-fault divorce laws allowed women to leave marriages for any reason whatsoever. In 1973, the Supreme Court ruled in Roe v. Wade that abortion was permitted in the first trimester. For the first time, women had legal protection from male violence. New paths that didn't include marriage or motherhood opened up for them. Court cases like Griggs v. Duke Power and United Steelworkers of America v. Weber protected African Americans against racial discrimination in industrial jobs, the very jobs that used to be almost the exclusive province of white males. Behind all of these efforts were Democratic politicians and judges. The Democrats had always centered the white male working class, but now it was clear that other groups were gaining influence over the party. White workers saw a decrease in the quality of their life and hopes for the future. What was easier to blame? Some nebulous changes in the world economy that became known as stagflation, or women, African Americans, and Democrats? In reality, more people were just fighting for the same shrinking slice of America's pie of the world economy. Women were entering the workforce but were relegated to service sector jobs that were not unionized and pulled in lower wages. Black people were trapped in red-lined areas of cities and cut off from suburban life by racist housing covenants. White male industrial workers might have been losing ground, but they still had more ground than anybody else. Unfortunately, neither political party was able to utter these uncomfortable truths. The Democratic Party of FDR used Keynesianism to address the Great Depression. It served the country well for decades, but that system was breaking down. The eternal truth of the Phillips curve, of inflation being a byproduct of an expanding economy, didn't fly anymore. People had less money in their pockets and prices were still going up. Nobody had a cure. The only solutions Democrats had involved civil rights and identity politics, so that is what they did. And what about the Republicans? As the party of big business, they stood in opposition to Keynesianism since the days of FDR. The success of Keynesian policy after World War II meant they had to work within the Keynesian system. As much as they would have liked to destroy social programs and union protections or cut taxes for the rich, they couldn't come out and say those things if they wanted to win elections. Nixon didn't do anything to rock the Keynesian boat. Not only did he maintain social programs, he created OSHA and the EPA, allowing him to pose as a friend to the workers. But it is revealing that Nixon didn't make any sweeping changes that created new jobs or protected the jobs that already existed. As important as OSHA and the EPA were, they weren't meaningful structural changes to the economy. They didn't expand the promise of a middle-class life to more Americans. They didn't expand Keynesianism, and they didn't hurt it either. Politically, it gave cover to the Republican Party and allowed them to mask the fact that they were still the party of big business. Nixon was able to do this while attacking the Democrats' concern over civil rights. It was a masterful move. For white working-class voters, neither party had a solution to growing stagflation, but at least Nixon gave voice to their anger of losing ground to African Americans and women. This strategy worked out for him in 1972, but could the Republicans make this permanent? After all, the Republican Party did want to do away with Keynesianism, unions, social spending, and the things that built the white working class in the first place. How could they continue to pull in white working class votes when they wanted to destroy the very foundation of white working class life? It was a tough circle to square, but they did it by 1980 when Ronald Reagan was elected president.